The waiter placed the champagne flute in front of me like he was delivering a subpoena. Around the mahogany table at Romano's steakhouse, Sophie's family had arranged themselves like vultures at a roadkill buffet. Her father, Richard Palmer, adjusted his Rolex and cleared his throat with the authority of a man who'd never been told no. "A toast," he announced, raising his glass, "to my beautiful daughter Sophie, who has such interesting taste in men." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The laughter that followed felt like nails on a chalkboard. Sophie giggled, covering her mouth with manicured fingers that sported a wedding ring I'd saved 6 months to buy. Her mother, Patricia, smiled that tight-lipped smile she'd perfected over 30 years of marriage to a corporate tyrant. And there was Tara, Sophie's best friend since college, recording everything on her phone for her Instagram story. I'm Eli Anderson, 34 years old, and according to everyone at this table, the biggest mistake my wife ever made. They saw the grease under my fingernails from working at Anderson Electrical Supply, the off-the-rack suit I'd worn to our anniversary dinner, the 10-year-old Honda parked between their BMWs and Mercedes outside. What they didn't see was the bank account with 7 figures, the patents filed under my company name, or the fact that their precious Sophie had been cheating on me for the past 8 months. "Come on, Dad," Sophie said, but she was still laughing. "Be nice to Eli." "I am being nice," Richard replied, cutting into his $100 steak. I could have said what I really think about gold diggers. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Sophie, who hadn't worked a day in her life, calling me a gold digger. Sophie, who maxed out credit cards on designer handbags while I paid the mortgage, the car payments, and her father's country club dues. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "let's talk about gold diggers." The table went quiet. Tara's phone stayed trained on me, probably hoping for drama to boost her follower count. "Sophie, honey," I continued, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "You're 31 years old. You've been married to me for 3 years, but you're still acting like you're in your, what do they call it these days? Your 304 phase?" Sophie's face went white. Patricia gasped. Richard's jaw tightened like a steel trap. "Eli," Sophie whispered, "what are you doing?" I pulled off my wedding ring and placed it next to my untouched steak. The gold band made a small clink against the plate that seemed to echo through the entire restaurant. "I'm done pretending this marriage means something to you," I said, standing up. "Enjoy your dinner. And Sophie, enjoy Chad Whitman's company. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know his secret's out." I walked toward the exit, leaving behind a table of stunned faces and one very interesting video that Tara was still recording. As I stepped outside into the main evening air, a red Ferrari pulled up to the valet stand. "Mr. Anderson," the valet called out, "your car is ready." I tossed him a $50 tip and slid into the driver's seat. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Palmer family frozen in shock, their mouths hanging open like they'd just witnessed a magic trick. The Ferrari's engine roared to life, and I pulled away from the curb with a smile spreading across my face. Sometimes the best revenge is just telling the truth at exactly the right moment. The drive home took 20 minutes through Portland's industrial district, past the shipyard where my grandfather had worked for 40 years, past the diner where Sophie and I had our first date, past all the places that used to mean something. The Ferrari handled like a dream, responding to every touch of the steering wheel, every press of the accelerator. It was a machine built for people who had arrived, not for people still climbing. I'd bought it 6 months ago, the same week I'd discovered Sophie's affair. The same week my startup, Anderson Tech Solutions, had landed a $12 million government contract for electrical grid security systems. The same week I'd realized my wife of 3 years had been treating our marriage like a temporary arrangement while she shopped for an upgrade. Our house sat on Maple Street, a modest two-story colonial that I'd bought in my own name before we got married. Smart move, as it turned out. I parked the Ferrari in the garage next to Sophie's BMW, the BMW I'd been making payments on for 2 years, and walked through the door that connected to our kitchen. The house felt different now, quieter, like it was holding its breath. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at the kitchen table where Sophie and I used to plan our future. Kids, maybe. A bigger house, definitely. Vacations to Europe, retirement plans, all the normal things married people talked about. What we never talked about was Chad Whitman, the hedge fund manager who'd been sliding into my wife's DMs since last Christmas. I'd found out about Chad the way most husbands discover these things. By accident. Sophie had left her laptop open to her email, and a notification popped up from a messaging app I'd never heard of. Curious, I'd clicked on it. What I found was 8 months of explicit conversations, photos, and videos that made it clear my wife had been living a double life. The smart thing would have been to confront her immediately. The smarter thing was what I actually did. I hired a private investigator named Frank Russo, an ex-Marine who specialized in corporate security and cheating spouses. Frank had given me a folder thick enough to choke a horse, filled with photos, timestamps, hotel receipts, and a complete timeline of Sophie's affair. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Where are you? We need to talk." I typed back, "I'm at home. Your home. The one I pay for." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I'm coming over." "No," I replied. "You're not." I walked to the front door and engaged the deadbolt, then went to the back door and did the same. Sophie had a key, but she'd never changed the locks. That was always my job, like fixing the garbage disposal, cleaning the gutters, and paying for her father's birthday dinners. My phone rang. Sophie's contact photo, a picture from our honeymoon in Cabo, filled the screen. "Eli, open the door," she said without preamble. "I can see your car in the garage." "Which car?" I asked. "The Honda or the Ferrari?" Silence. Then, "What Ferrari?" "The one I bought with money from my company, Anderson Tech Solutions. You know, the electrical supply shop that apparently makes enough money to afford $100,000 cars." "That's impossible. You run a small business. You barely make enough to—" "To what, Sophie? To support your shopping habits? To pay for your yoga classes and spa days and girls' trips to Miami? You're right. The electrical supply shop barely breaks even. But the tech company I built on the side, the one with the government contracts and the patent portfolio, that one does just fine." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing this information. "Eli, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I was just a blue-collar guy trying to make ends meet. Turns out you're exactly the person I thought you were." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about Chad, Sophie. I know about the hotel rooms and the weekend trips and the lies you've been telling me for 8 months. I know about everything." The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, in a small voice, "How long have you known?" "Long enough to make some plans." "What kind of plans?" I looked around the kitchen, at the coffee maker I'd programmed every night for 3 years, at the refrigerator covered with photos of us at various family gatherings, at the calendar where Sophie had marked her yoga classes and book club meetings. Meetings that, according to Frank's investigation, were actually rendezvous with her boyfriend. "The kind that start with you finding somewhere else to sleep tonight," I said, and hung up. Frank Russo looked like Central Casting's idea of an ex-Marine, buzz cut, square jaw, and the kind of build that suggested he could bench press a Buick. He sat across from me in the back booth at Murphy's Tavern, nursing a beer and reviewing the contents of a manila folder that contained the last 8 months of my wife's secret life. "Your wife's not very good at covering her tracks," Frank said, sliding a photograph across the scarred wooden table. "This was taken last Tuesday at the Eastland Park Hotel. She told you she was at book club, right?" The photo showed Sophie and Chad entering the hotel lobby, his hand on the small of her back, in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday. Book club, I confirmed, taking a long pull from my bourbon. They were supposedly discussing eat, pray, love. Looks like they skipped straight to the love part, Frank said with a grim smile. I've got 17 more photos from that day alone, plus video footage from the hotel security cameras. Your lawyer's going to have a field day with this. Murphy's Tavern was the kind of place where construction workers came to complain about their bosses and office workers came to pretend they were blue-collar. The walls were covered with faded sports memorabilia and the floors were sticky with decades of spilled beer. It was also the kind of place where nobody paid attention to other people's conversations, which made it perfect for planning what Frank called the counteroffensive. Here's what I don't understand, I said, studying another photo of Sophie and Chad at a restaurant I couldn't afford. She's married to me, but she's acting like she's still single, like she's still shopping around for something better. Some people never grow up, Frank said. They get married, but they keep one foot out the door, just in case. Your wife's been treating you like a placeholder. A placeholder. That's exactly what I'd been. A safe option while Sophie figured out what she really wanted. Someone to pay the bills and provide stability while she explored her options with men like Chad Whitman, who drove a Porsche and worked on Wall Street and could afford to take her to 5-star restaurants without checking his bank account first. So what's the plan? Frank asked. I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. The simple answer was divorce. File the papers, split the assets, move on with my life. But the simple answer didn't account for the humiliation, the wasted years, or the fact that Sophie and her family had spent 3 years treating me like I was lucky to be in their presence. I want them to know who they're dealing with, I said. All of them. Sophie, Chad, her parents, that friend of hers who's always recording everything. I want them to understand that they picked the wrong guy to underestimate. Frank leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Now you're talking my language. What did you have in mind? I pulled out my phone and showed him a news article from the Portland Business Journal. Local tech startup lands major federal contract. The article was 3 paragraphs long and buried on page 6, but it mentioned Anderson Tech Solutions by name and described our work on electrical grid security systems. Most people don't read the business section, I said, but it's all public record. My company exists, the contracts are real, and the money is very real. I've just been keeping a low profile. How low? Low enough that my wife thinks I'm barely scraping by. Low enough that her father thinks I'm a charity case. Low enough that Chad Whitman thinks he's stealing another man's wife instead of walking into a trap. Frank finished his beer and signaled the bartender for another round. I like where this is going. What's the first move? Information warfare, I said. Sophie's been living in my house, driving a car I pay for, using credit cards linked to my accounts. As of tonight, all of that stops. I'm cutting off her access to everything. That's a start. What about Chad? Chad's more complicated. He thinks he's won some kind of prize by stealing Sophie away from her loser husband. I want him to understand exactly what kind of prize he's actually won. The bartender brought our drinks. Another bourbon for me, another beer for Frank. The tavern was filling up with the after-work crowd, men and women who looked like they'd put in honest days at honest jobs. People like the person I'd been pretending to be for the past 3 years. You know, Frank said, there's something poetic about this whole situation. Your wife's been cheating on you with a rich guy, not knowing that you're richer than he is. How much richer? Frank pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot from a financial website. Chad Whitman, portfolio manager at Whitman & Associates. According to this, he manages about $50 million in assets. His personal net worth is estimated at around $2 million. I smiled. Anderson Tech Solutions was valued at $15 million, and I owned 60% of it. My personal liquid assets were approaching $4 million, not counting real estate and investments. Chad Whitman wasn't stealing my wife, he was inheriting my problem. Phase 1 starts tomorrow, I said. I'm going to introduce myself to Chad properly. Let him know he's dealing with someone who plays by different rules. What about Sophie? Sophie's about to learn that actions have consequences, and that the man she's been treating like a safety net has been holding all the cards from the beginning. Frank raised his beer in a mock toast, to the element of surprise. To the last laugh, I replied, and we drank to the beginning of the end. Sophie's BMW wouldn't start. I watched from the kitchen window as she turned the key again and again, getting nothing but silence from the engine. She climbed out of the car, her face twisted with frustration, and pulled out her phone to call me. I let it go to voicemail. She tried the front door next, her key sliding into the lock but refusing to turn. I'd changed all the locks at 6 that morning before she'd returned from whatever hotel room she'd spent the night in. The locksmith had been expensive but efficient, and now Sophie was standing on the porch of what used to be our home, locked out of her own life. My phone buzzed with a text. Eli, what did you do to my car? I typed back, your car is fine. The battery's just disconnected. Easy fix if you know where to look. Why won't my key work? Because it's not your house. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before she finally responded. This is insane. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I replied. Bring them the deed to the house. Oh wait, your name's not on it. The truth was, I'd bought the house 2 years before we got married, using money from my first government contract. Sophie had moved in after our wedding, but she'd never been added to the deed. At the time, it had seemed like a minor oversight. Now it felt like the smartest decision I'd ever made. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled in to watch the show. Sophie was pacing back and forth on the front porch, her phone pressed to her ear. Probably calling Tara, or her mother, or Chad. Maybe all 3. The morning sun caught the highlights in her blonde hair, and for a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her. Beautiful, charming, full of life. It had taken me 3 years to realize that charm without substance was just manipulation with better marketing. My phone rang. Richard Palmer's name appeared on the screen. Eli, he said without preamble. What the hell do you think you're doing? Good morning, Richard. I'm having coffee and watching your daughter learn about property law. You can't lock her out of her own home. It's not her home. It's my home. She's welcome to visit, but she'll need to call first. This is ridiculous. Sophie made a mistake, but you're acting like a child. A mistake. 8 months of hotel rooms and secret phone calls and lying to my face was a mistake. Like forgetting to pick up milk at the grocery store or missing an anniversary dinner. Richard, let me ask you something. If one of your employees was stealing from your company for 8 months, would you call that a mistake? That's completely different. Is it? Sophie's been stealing my time, my trust, and my money while she shopped around for my replacement. The only difference is that your employees probably have more integrity. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want, Eli? Money? We can work something out. And there it was, the Palmer family solution to every problem. Throw money at it until it goes away. It had worked when Sophie crashed her car in college, when she got arrested for shoplifting in her 20s, when she needed someone to co-sign for credit cards she couldn't afford. But money couldn't fix this, because money wasn't the problem. I don't want your money, Richard. I want your daughter to face the consequences of her choices. What consequences? You're talking about divorce over a little indiscretion. A little indiscretion? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended. Richard, your daughter has been conducting a full-scale affair for 8 months. Hotel rooms, weekend trips, explicit photos and videos. If this was a business deal, you'd call it fraud. How do you... He stopped himself, but it was too late. How do I know? Because I hired a private investigator. Because I documented everything. Because unlike your daughter, I believe in being prepared. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing this information. Richard Palmer was many things: arrogant, controlling, dismissive. But he wasn't stupid. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be the simple divorce he'd expected, where his daughter walked away with half of my imaginary assets. "We should meet," he said finally. "Discuss this like adults. I'm free this afternoon, 2 o'clock at your office." "Fine. And Eli? Bring a reasonable attitude." "I'll bring documentation," I said, and hung up. Outside, Sophie had given up on the front door and was walking around to the back of the house, probably hoping I'd forgotten to change those locks too. I hadn't. I'd also installed new security cameras and changed the garage door codes. The house that had been our home for 3 years was now my fortress, and Sophie was on the outside looking in. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Chad. We need to talk." I smiled and typed back, "I couldn't agree more. Murphy's Tavern, 8 tonight. Come alone." "Why would I meet with you?" "Because you're sleeping with my wife, and I have some things you should know about that arrangement." The response came quickly. "What kind of things?" "The expensive kind. See you at 8. I set the phone aside and watched Sophie try the back door, her frustration mounting with each failed attempt. She was learning the first lesson of the new reality. The game had changed, and she no longer knew the rules. But she was about to find out. Richard Palmer's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Portland, with windows that offered a commanding view of Casco Bay. The walls were covered with awards, photos of Richard shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, and a collection of antique maritime instruments that probably cost more than most people's cars. It was designed to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were in the presence of someone important. I sat across from Richard's mahogany desk in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, a manila folder in my lap, and a recording app running on my phone. Richard had aged well for a man in his 60s. Silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit tailored to hide the softness that came with executive lunches and country club dinners. He looked like central casting's idea of a successful businessman. "Eli," he said, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a negotiation, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this." "I haven't decided anything yet," I replied. "I'm here to listen to your offer." "My offer is simple. Sophie made a mistake, but she's young and she's learned her lesson. You two can work this out with some counseling, maybe a nice vacation to reconnect. I'm prepared to cover the costs, naturally." I opened the folder and placed a photograph on his desk. It showed Sophie and Chad entering a hotel room, his hand on her ass, her face turned up toward his with an expression I'd never seen her use with me. "This was taken 3 days ago," I said. "Does this look like someone who's learned her lesson?" Richard glanced at the photo and pushed it back toward me like it was contaminated. "That doesn't prove anything." I placed another photo on the desk. Sophie and Chad at a restaurant feeding each other dessert. Then another. The two of them on a beach somewhere. Sophie in a bikini I'd never seen before. Then a hotel receipt showing a weekend stay that coincided with Sophie's supposed girls' trip to Boston. "I have 47 photographs," I said. 17 videos, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, text messages, and a complete timeline covering 8 months of systematic deception. Your daughter hasn't made a mistake, Richard. She's made a lifestyle choice." Richard's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "Even if that's true, divorce is still the nuclear option. Think about what you're throwing away." "What am I throwing away? A wife who lies to me every day? A marriage that exists only on paper? The privilege of paying for someone else's girlfriend's expenses? You're throwing away your connection to this family, the opportunities that come with that connection." And there it was, the carrot Richard always dangled when the stick wasn't working. The promise of advancement, of acceptance into the Palmer family circle, of doors opening that would otherwise remain closed. It was the same promise that had kept me quiet when Richard made his jokes about gold diggers, the same promise that had made me swallow my pride at family dinners and charity events. "Richard," I said, pulling out my phone, "let me show you something." I opened the Portland Business Journal app and navigated to an article from 6 months ago. Anderson Tech Solutions awarded $12 million federal contract for grid security systems. Richard took the phone and read the article, his expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something approaching respect. "You own a tech company?" "I own a tech company that's currently valued at $15 million. I hold 6 patents in electrical grid security, and I have 3 more government contracts pending approval. The electrical supply shop is just a front." Richard set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I was beneath you. Turns out, you're exactly the people I thought you were." The office fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 20 floors below. Richard was processing this information, recalculating everything he thought he knew about his daughter's marriage. "If you're as successful as you claim," he said finally, "then you can afford to be generous in the divorce settlement." I laughed. Actually laughed, and Richard's face darkened. "Generous? Richard, your daughter has been committing adultery for 8 months while living in my house, driving my car, and spending my money. In Maine, that's called dissipation of marital assets. She's not getting half of anything. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Frank Russo, my private investigator, used to work corporate security. He knows how to document evidence that will hold up in court. Your daughter is about to learn that actions have consequences." Richard stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, in a pose I'd seen him use in newspaper photos. When he turned back to face me, his expression had hardened into something approaching hatred. "You think you're very clever, don't you? Playing the wounded husband while you plot your revenge. I think I'm very prepared. There's a difference." "What do you want, Eli? What's it going to take to make this go away quietly?" "I want Sophie to face the truth about what she's done. I want Chad to understand what kind of woman he's really involved with. And I want you to know that the man you've been treating like a charity case for 3 years is the same man who's about to expose your daughter as a cheating, lying, manipulative. Enough." Richard's voice cracked like a whip. "You've made your point." I stood up and collected the photographs, sliding them back into the folder with deliberate care. "No, Richard, I haven't even started making my point. But I will. Tonight, tomorrow, and every day until everyone in this city knows exactly who Sophie Palmer Anderson really is." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Oh, and Richard? That BMW Sophie's been driving? The one with the loan in my name? I'm repossessing it tomorrow. She can ask Chad for a ride." I left Richard Palmer standing in his corner office, surrounded by all the symbols of his success, finally understanding that he'd been playing chess while I'd been playing 3-dimensional chess. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt like a victory lap. Chad Whitman arrived at Murphy's Tavern 15 minutes late, probably hoping to make an entrance. He looked exactly like Central Casting's idea of a Wall Street success story: expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of confident swagger that came from never being told no. He scanned the room like he was looking for the manager to complain about the decor. I waved him over to my booth in the back corner, the same one where Frank and I had planned this whole operation. Chad approached with the cautious steps of a man entering unfamiliar territory, his nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of decades-old beer and working-class sweat. "You must be Eli," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I have to say, this isn't what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone more, I don't know, impressive? Sophie talks about you like you're some kind of threat, but you look pretty ordinary to me." The bartender, a thick-set woman named Dolores, who'd been serving drinks at Murphy's since the Carter administration, appeared at our table with a questioning look. I'll have a Grey Goose martini, Chad said, dry with olives. Dolores stared at him like he'd just ordered a unicorn sandwich. We got beer, whiskey, and whatever's in that bottle behind the bar that might be vodka. Take your pick. Just give me a beer, I guess. Whatever's good. They're all good if you're thirsty enough, Dolores said, and walked away shaking her head. Chad watched her go, then turned back to me with an expression of mild disgust. Charming place. I can see why you chose it. I chose it because it's the kind of place where people mind their own business, I said. Which is good, because we need to have a conversation about my wife. Your ex-wife, you mean. We're still married, Chad. Sophie might be shopping around for upgrades, but she's still legally bound to me for at least another 6 months. Dolores returned with 2 bottles of Budweiser and set them down without ceremony. Chad looked at his beer like it might bite him. Look, he said, I know this is awkward, but these things happen. Sophie and I have a connection. Sometimes people grow apart, and sometimes they find someone more compatible. Compatible. That's an interesting word choice. It's accurate. Sophie needs someone who can appreciate her qualities, someone who can provide for her properly. No offense, but running an electrical supply shop isn't exactly the fast track to success. I took a long pull from my beer and studied Chad's face. He was handsome in a generic way, with the kind of features that looked good in corporate headshots and country club photos. But there was something soft about him, something that suggested he'd never been tested by real adversity. Tell me about your business, Chad. Portfolio management, right? That's right. I manage investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. It's a very specialized field. How specialized? Well, my clients trust me with their financial futures. It requires a deep understanding of market dynamics, risk assessment, portfolio diversification. Not everyone can do what I do. What's your biggest account? Chad hesitated, probably wondering if this was some kind of trap. I manage about $50 million in total assets across all my clients. Impressive. What kind of returns do you generate? Last year, I averaged 8% across all portfolios, which is well above the market average. I nodded appreciatively. 8% of 50 million. That's 4 million in gains for your clients. What's your fee structure? 1% management fee plus 20% of gains above 6%. I did the math in my head. Chad's annual income was probably around $700,000. Good money, but not the kind of wealth that would impress someone like Sophie's father. So, you're doing well, I said. Well enough to take Sophie to nice restaurants, weekend trips, 5-star hotels. Chad's expression shifted slightly. Sophie deserves to be treated well. She's been settling for less for too long. Settling. Another interesting word choice. Come on, Eli. Look around. Chad gestured at the tavern's faded decor and working-class clientele. This is your world. Sophie belongs somewhere better. I pulled out my phone and opened the Portland Business Journal app, then slid it across the table. Chad looked down at the screen, reading the headline. Local tech startup lands major federal contract. Anderson Tech Solutions, I said. That's my company. $12 million contract with 2 more pending. Total company valuation, $15 million. My personal net worth, just over $4 million. Chad's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching fear. That's impossible. Sophie said you barely make ends meet. Sophie doesn't know about the tech company. She thinks I'm just a blue-collar guy trying to pay the bills. Which raises an interesting question. What kind of woman cheats on her husband without bothering to learn basic facts about his financial situation? Chad pushed the phone back toward me like it was radioactive. This doesn't change anything. Sophie and I have a real connection. You have a connection with a woman who's been lying to both of us. She's been lying to me about you, and she's been lying to you about me. What makes you think she's telling you the truth about anything else? I pulled out the manila folder Frank had given me and placed it on the table between us. This contains 8 months of documentation about Sophie's affair, photos, videos, hotel receipts, text messages, everything a divorce lawyer would need to prove adultery and dissipation of marital assets. Chad stared at the folder like it might catch fire. What do you want? I want you to understand what you're getting into. Sophie isn't leaving me for you, Chad. She's using you as an exit strategy, and when she finds someone with more money or better connections, she'll do the same thing to you. You're just trying to poison the well because you're losing her. I lost her 8 months ago. I just didn't know it yet. I stood up and left a 20 on the table. Enjoy your beer, Chad, and enjoy Sophie. But understand that you're not winning a prize. You're inheriting a problem. I walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Chad? You might want to ask Sophie about her 304 phase. She'll know what that means. I left Chad sitting alone in the booth, staring at the folder and probably wondering what other surprises were waiting for him in his new relationship. Outside, the evening air felt clean and fresh, like the first breath after a long illness. Tara Morrison had 47,000 Instagram followers, most of whom seemed to live vicariously through her carefully curated posts about brunch dates, shopping trips, and nights out with her squad. She was the kind of person who documented every moment of her life as if it were a performance, and last night's anniversary dinner had been no exception. I discovered this at 7 in the morning when Frank called to tell me that Tara's video of my dramatic exit from Romano's steakhouse had gone viral. You need to see this, Frank said. She posted it with the caption, "When keeping it real goes wrong," and tagged everyone who was at the dinner. It's got 15,000 views already. I opened Instagram on my phone and found Tara's profile. The video was pinned to the top of her feed, a 30-second clip that started with Richard Palmer's toast and ended with me walking out of the restaurant. The comment section was a battlefield of opinions, speculation, and gossip. Drama alert. That man just ended his whole marriage in public. Wait, who is Chad Whitman, and why does everyone know that name? Sophie Anderson is gorgeous. Her husband is punching above his weight. Plot twist. What if the husband is actually rich and playing mind games? That last comment had 17 replies, most of them dismissing the idea as wishful thinking, but a few people had done their homework. Just Googled Anderson Tech Solutions. This guy owns a multi-million-dollar company. No way, Sophie's husband is loaded? This is like a real-life soap opera. I scrolled through the comments, watching in real time as strangers pieced together the story. Someone had found the Portland Business Journal article about my government contracts. Someone else had connected Chad Whitman to his LinkedIn profile and started speculating about the affair. Within hours, what had started as Tara's attempt to embarrass me had turned into a public investigation of Sophie's private life. My phone rang. Sophie's number. Eli, you have to make Tara take down that video. Good morning to you too, Sophie. How did you sleep? Hotel room comfortable? This isn't funny. People are saying horrible things about me online. What kind of things? They're calling me a gold digger and a cheater. They're sharing photos of me and Chad. Someone found my personal Instagram and they're commenting on pictures from 2 years ago. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the driveway, where Sophie's BMW sat with its hood up. She'd apparently spent the morning trying to reconnect the battery based on the scattered tools around the car. Sophie, you are a gold digger and a cheater. The only difference is that now other people know it too. You planned this, didn't you? You wanted to humiliate me in public. I wanted to tell the truth. If the truth is humiliating, that's not my problem. My mother is getting calls from her friends. My father is furious. Tara says people are messaging her asking for more details about our marriage. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started your affair. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, in a smaller voice, "What do you want, Eli? What's it going to take to make this stop? I want you to face the consequences of your choices. I want Chad to understand what kind of woman he's involved with. And I want everyone who's spent the last 3 years treating me like I was lucky to be married to you to know exactly who they were dealing with." People are sharing photos of our house. They know where we live. They know where I live. You don't live here anymore, remember? Eli, please. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve this. You made choices, Sophie. 8 months of deliberate, calculated choices. You chose to lie to me, to cheat on me, to spend my money while you shopped around for my replacement. The only thing you didn't choose was the consequences. I hung up and poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, a car I didn't recognize was driving slowly past the house, the passenger holding up a phone to record video. The internet had turned my personal drama into public entertainment, and Sophie was discovering that being the villain in someone else's story was a lot less fun than she'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Check the local news. Channel 8 just picked up the story. I turned on the television and flipped to the morning news. A perky blonde reporter was standing outside Romano's steakhouse talking about a dramatic confrontation that was caught on camera and shared thousands of times on social media. The video played again, but this time with professional commentary. The man in the video has been identified as Eli Anderson, owner of Anderson Tech Solutions, a local company that recently received a major federal contract. His wife, Sophie Anderson, has not responded to requests for comment. The reporter went on to discuss the growing trend of public breakups in the social media age and the dangers of sharing private moments online. But the damage was done. Sophie's affair was now public knowledge, and the narrative was writing itself. Cheating wife gets caught, husband fights back, social media takes sides. My phone rang again. Richard Palmer. Eli, this has gone too far. The story is on the news. My daughter is being harassed online. You need to fix this. I didn't break it, Richard. Sophie did. I'm just not covering for her anymore. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're enjoying watching my family suffer. I'm enjoying watching your family face reality. For 3 years, you've all treated me like I was beneath you. Now you know exactly who you were dealing with. What do you want? Money? A public apology? Name your price. I want Sophie to admit what she did. I want her to stop pretending she's the victim. And I want you to understand that the man you've been looking down on for 3 years is the same man who's about to take your daughter to the cleaners in divorce court. I hung up and turned back to the television, where the reporter was now interviewing random people on the street about their opinions on public breakups and social media drama. The story had taken on a life of its own, beyond anyone's ability to control it. Sophie had wanted to live her life like a performance, carefully curated for maximum impact. Now she was getting her wish, just not in the way she'd expected. The show was just getting started. The law offices of Morrison, Katz & Associates occupied the 15th floor of Portland's newest office building, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. I sat across from David Morrison, one of Maine's most expensive divorce attorneys, while he reviewed the evidence Frank had compiled over the past 8 months. This is remarkably thorough, Morrison said, flipping through photographs and bank statements. Your investigator has documented everything: hotel receipts, restaurant bills, timeline analysis, even GPS data from her phone. Your wife's affair is going to be very difficult to deny. Morrison was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested his hourly rate started somewhere north of $500. He'd built his reputation handling high-profile divorces for politicians and business executives, cases where discretion was as important as legal skill. What kind of settlement can I expect? I asked. Given the evidence of adultery and the fact that the house is in your name alone, you're looking at a very favorable outcome. Maine is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still impact property division and spousal support. Your wife will be lucky to walk away with 20% of the marital assets. And the business? Anderson Tech Solutions was established before your marriage and funded entirely with your personal assets. Your wife has no claim to it whatsoever. I leaned back in the leather chair and looked out at the harbor, where fishing boats were heading out for the morning catch. 3 days ago, Sophie had been planning her next hotel rendezvous with Chad Whitman. Now she was about to discover that her affair had cost her everything. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. The story went viral on social media. Local news picked it up. My wife's affair is now public knowledge. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That complicates things. Public humiliation can sometimes generate sympathy for the other party, especially if she claims you orchestrated the exposure. I didn't orchestrate anything. Her friend posted a video of our anniversary dinner, and the internet connected the dots. Still, we need to be careful about the narrative. Judges don't like vindictive behavior, even when it's justified. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Chad's at Sophie's hotel. They're having a loud argument in the parking lot. Want me to document it?" I typed back, "Yes, everything." Morrison noticed my distraction. "Problems?" "Developments. My wife's boyfriend is apparently having second thoughts about their relationship." "That's not surprising. Public affairs tend to lose their appeal when they stop being secret." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street 15 floors below. Somewhere in this city, Sophie was discovering that actions have consequences. Somewhere else, Chad was learning that stolen pleasures come with unexpected costs. And in a few hours, both of them would understand that the man they'd underestimated had been playing a completely different game all along. "Mr. Morrison," I said, turning back to face him, "I want to file for divorce today. Full documentation, no settlement offers, no negotiations. I want this to be as public and as thorough as legally possible. That's going to be expensive and messy. I can afford expensive, and messy is exactly what Sophie deserves." Morrison smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since I'd walked into his office. "Mr. Anderson, I think this is going to be a very interesting case." 2 hours later, I was sitting in my car outside the Eastland Park Hotel when Sophie and Chad emerged from the lobby. Even from a distance, I could see the tension between them. Sophie's face was red and puffy from crying, and Chad looked like a man who'd just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. They stopped beside Chad's Porsche, their voices raised in argument. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Chad was trying to end things, and Sophie was desperate to hold on to what she thought was her escape route. Frank's van was parked across the street, his camera capturing every moment of their public breakdown. In a few hours, this footage would be added to the mountain of evidence that would destroy Sophie in divorce court. My phone rang, Sophie's number. "Eli, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone, in person. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Where?" "The house. Our house. I want to come home." I almost laughed. After 3 days of hotels and public humiliation, Sophie wanted to come home. After 8 months of lying and cheating, she wanted to talk. "The house isn't our house anymore, Sophie. It's my house, and you're not welcome there." "Please, Eli. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. I'll end things with Chad." "You don't need to end things with Chad. Chad's ending things with you." The line went quiet. Then, in a broken voice, "How did you know?" "Because I know Chad. He's not the kind of man who wants to be associated with a public scandal. He's not the kind of man who wants to inherit another man's problems. And he's definitely not the kind of man who wants to marry a woman who's about to lose everything in a divorce." "I'm not going to lose everything. Sophie, I filed for divorce this morning. By tomorrow, everyone in Portland is going to know exactly what kind of person you are and exactly what you did to our marriage. Chad Whitman isn't going to want any part of that mess." "You bastard. You planned this whole thing." "I planned to protect myself from a woman who was using me as a safety net while she shopped around for something better. If that makes me a bastard, I can live with it." I hung up and drove home, past the reporters who were still camped outside Romano's steakhouse, past the curious neighbors who'd been driving by my house all morning, past all the people who were watching my personal drama unfold like a real-life soap opera. The game was almost over. Sophie had made her choices, and now she was going to live with the consequences. Chad had gotten a taste of what it felt like to be the other man in a public scandal, and he'd decided he didn't like the flavor. And me? I was about to get my life back, along with a very expensive lesson about the difference between love and performance, between marriage and transaction, between the person you think you're married to and the person you actually married. The last laugh was going to be mine after all. The Portland Civic Center was an unlikely venue for a corporate product launch, but Anderson Tech Solutions had outgrown every other space in the city. 500 people filled the auditorium. Government contractors, electrical engineers, business reporters, and curious locals who'd heard about the mystery tech company that had been operating in their backyard for 5 years. I stood backstage, adjusting my tie and watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. In the third row, I spotted Richard Palmer, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He'd probably come hoping to find some way to salvage his daughter's reputation, or maybe just to see for himself whether his son-in-law was really the tech mogul the newspapers were claiming him to be. 5 minutes, Mr. Anderson, the stage manager said. I walked to the podium as the lights dimmed and the crowd fell silent. The presentation screen behind me displayed the Anderson Tech Solutions logo, a stylized electrical grid that I'd designed myself 5 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my name is Eli Anderson, and I want to tell you a story about the power of underestimation. The crowd chuckled, not yet understanding where this was going. 5 years ago, I started Anderson Tech Solutions in the basement of my house, working nights and weekends while running a small electrical supply shop during the day. I told almost no one about the company, including my own family. I wanted to see what I could build without the burden of other people's expectations. I clicked to the next slide, showing Anderson Tech's financial growth over 5 years. The numbers were impressive. Revenue growing from $50,000 in year 1 to $15 million in year 5. The result was a company that now holds 6 patents in electrical grid security, employs 47 people, and has contracts with the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, and 3 major utilities. We've built something remarkable, and we've done it quietly. The audience was paying attention now, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical corporate presentation. But tonight isn't just about Anderson Tech Solutions. It's about the danger of judging people by appearances, of assuming that success looks a certain way, of treating others as less than they are because they don't fit your expectations. I clicked to the next slide. A photo of Sophie and me at our wedding 3 years ago, both of us smiling and looking impossibly young. This is my wife, Sophie, or rather my soon-to-be ex-wife. For 3 years, Sophie and her family treated me like I was lucky to be married to her. They saw the grease under my fingernails, the modest house, the 10-year-old Honda, and they assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a small businessman struggling to make ends meet. The auditorium was completely silent now. This had definitely not been the product launch they were expecting. What they didn't see was the late nights spent developing grid security algorithms, the patent applications, the government meetings, the contracts worth millions of dollars. They didn't see any of that because I didn't want them to see it. I wanted to know who they really were when they thought I was beneath them. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of Chad Whitman that Frank had taken outside the Eastland Park Hotel. This is Chad Whitman, a portfolio manager who's been having an affair with my wife for the past 8 months. Chad thought he was stealing another man's wife. What he was actually doing was inheriting another man's problem. A murmur ran through the crowd. In the third row, Richard Palmer was staring at me with undisguised hatred. Ladies and gentlemen, the point of this story isn't revenge, although I'll admit there's been some satisfaction in watching people who underestimated me realize their mistake. The point is that success doesn't always look the way you expect it to look. Innovation doesn't always come from where you expect it to come from, and the person you're dismissing today might be the person whose respect you're begging for tomorrow. I clicked to the final slide, Anderson Tech Solutions' new logo, and the tagline, "Hidden in Plain Sight." Anderson Tech Solutions is moving our headquarters to a new facility in South Portland. We're hiring 50 new employees over the next year, and we're launching a new division focused on renewable energy grid integration. We've been hiding in plain sight for 5 years, but that ends tonight. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. I stood at the podium, looking out at 500 people who were seeing me clearly for the first time, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: the satisfaction of being understood. As the crowd began to file out, Richard Palmer pushed his way to the front of the stage. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. "You bastard," he said, loud enough for the remaining audience members to hear. "You humiliated my daughter in front of the entire city." "Your daughter humiliated herself," I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "I just stopped covering for her. She made a mistake. She's young. She's learning. She's 31 years old, Richard. She's not learning. She's choosing. And she chose to treat our marriage like a temporary arrangement while she shopped around for something better." Security was moving toward us, but I held up a hand to stop them. This conversation needed to happen in public, with witnesses. "What do you want?" Richard asked. "What's it going to take to make this right?" "Nothing you can give me," I said. "Your daughter cost herself a marriage to a millionaire because she thought she was trading up to a better millionaire. That's not my problem to solve." I walked off the stage, leaving Richard Palmer standing alone in front of an audience of strangers, finally understanding that the man he'd been looking down on for 3 years had been looking down on him the entire time. Outside, the Maine evening was crisp and clear. Frank was waiting by my car, a satisfied smile on his face. "How'd it feel?" he asked. "Like the end of a very long game," I replied. "What's next?" "Next, I go home to my house, pour myself a drink, and start planning the rest of my life. A life that doesn't include Sophie Palmer Anderson." I drove home through the city I'd lived in my entire life, past the neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the businesses I'd patronized for decades, past all the places that had shaped me into the man I'd become. But tonight, everything looked different. Tonight, I wasn't the underdog anymore. Tonight, I was exactly who I'd always been, and everyone finally knew it. Epilogue: The Last Laugh. 6 months later, I was sitting in the conference room of my new headquarters, reviewing quarterly reports with my management team. Anderson Tech Solutions had grown to 68 employees, and our renewable energy division had just landed a contract with the state of California worth $23 million. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Portland Harbor, where container ships loaded and unloaded cargo bound for destinations around the world. The view reminded me every day that success was about more than money. It was about perspective, about seeing opportunities that others missed, about playing the long game while everyone else focused on short-term gains. My assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Anderson, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." Sophie walked into the conference room wearing a dress I'd never seen before and an expression I recognized all too well, the look she used when she wanted something. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and she'd lost weight. The past 6 months hadn't been kind to her. "Hello, Eli." "Sophie, this is unexpected. I was hoping we could talk. Privately." I looked around the conference table at my management team, people who'd helped build Anderson Tech from a basement startup into a major player in the energy sector. "Actually, I think they should hear this. These people have been more loyal to me in 2 years than you were in 3. What did you want to talk about?" Sophie's composure cracked slightly. She'd probably expected to have this conversation alone, where she could use the intimacy of our shared history to manipulate the outcome. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for everything. For the affair, for the lies, for not seeing who you really were. I accept your apology. Is that all? I was hoping..." I was hoping we could try again, start over. I know I made mistakes, but I've learned from them. The conference room was completely silent. My management team was trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word. Sophie, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. For 8 months, you chose to lie to me, to cheat on me, to spend my money while you looked for my replacement. Those weren't accidents or errors in judgment. They were deliberate decisions. I know, but... And when you got caught, you didn't apologize. You didn't take responsibility. You tried to make me the villain for exposing your affair. You called me vindictive for refusing to cover for you anymore. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, real ones, as far as I could tell. I was scared, Eli. I was embarrassed. I didn't know how to face what I'd done. How's Chad? I asked. The question hit her like a physical blow. Chad and I, we're not together anymore. When did that end? About a week after your presentation. He said he couldn't handle the publicity, the scandal. He said I came with too much baggage. So he dumped you when you stopped being fun and started being expensive. That must have been a difficult lesson. It was. But it made me realize what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where my grandfather had worked for 40 years. He'd been a simple man with simple values. Work hard, tell the truth, keep your promises. Values that Sophie had never understood. Sophie, do you know what my net worth is today? No. $12 million. Anderson Tech is valued at $35 million, and I own 70% of it. The house you used to live in, I bought 2 more just like it, as investment properties. The Honda you were embarrassed to be seen in, I replaced it with a Tesla, a BMW, and that Ferrari you saw at the restaurant. Sophie was staring at me with an expression of growing horror, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd given up. You could have had all of this, I continued. If you'd been patient, if you'd been loyal, if you'd been the partner I thought I was marrying. Instead, you chose to cheat on a millionaire because you thought you were trading up to a better millionaire. I know. I know I made the worst mistake of my life. No, Sophie. Your worst mistake was thinking you could come back here and convince me to give you another chance. Your worst mistake was thinking I'd forgotten who you really are. I walked back to the conference table and sat down, surrounded by people who'd earned their places in my life through competence and loyalty. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. You got exactly what you deserved. 20% of the marital assets, no spousal support, and no claim to Anderson Tech. You're not my wife anymore, Sophie. You're not my problem anymore, and you're not welcome in my office anymore. Sophie stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that the game was over and she'd lost everything. I'm sorry, Eli. I'm so sorry. I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry you lost your meal ticket. Sorry Chad turned out to be exactly the kind of man who would dump you when things got complicated. But you're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry it didn't work out the way you planned. Security appeared in the doorway. I'd pressed the button under my desk when Sophie started crying. Please escort Ms. Palmer to the parking garage, I said. She won't be returning. After Sophie left, my management team sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, my CFO cleared her throat. That was your ex-wife? That was my ex-wife. She's very beautiful, charming, manipulative. Yes, she's all of those things. She's also a cautionary tale about the difference between what people appear to be and who they really are. I looked around the conference table at the people who'd helped build my company, people who'd earned my trust through their actions rather than their promises. Let's get back to work, I said. We have a business to run. That evening, I drove home to my house on Maple Street, the same house where Sophie and I had planned our future, where I'd discovered her affair, where I'd made the decision to stop being the man everyone expected me to be and start being the man I actually was. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my kitchen, looking out at the driveway where Sophie's BMW used to sit. The space was empty now, like the place in my life where our marriage used to be. But empty wasn't the same as hollow. Empty was just potential waiting to be filled. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Saw the news about the California contract. Congratulations, boss. I typed back, thanks. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Absolutely. Murphy's Tavern? Actually, let's try somewhere new. I'm thinking it's time to upgrade our usual spot. You sure? Murphy's has character. Murphy's has history. But I'm not the same person who used to drink there. I set the phone aside and raised my glass in a solitary toast to the empty kitchen, to the quiet house, to the life I'd built from nothing, while everyone around me assumed I was nothing. Sophie had been right about one thing. I had planned the whole thing. Not the affair, not the public humiliation, not the viral video that had exposed her secrets to the world. But I had planned to find out who she really was when she thought I couldn't do anything about it. I had planned to document everything, to protect myself, to make sure that when the truth finally came out, I would be the one holding all the cards. The last laugh, as it turned out, was worth waiting for.